Have you ever considered how much of human history remains hidden just beneath the surface of what we're taught? Throughout the centuries, secret societies have operated in the shadows, quietly influencing art, science, and even the course of nations. While many of these groups have faded into obscurity, one enigmatic brotherhood continues to capture our imagination like no other: the Rosicrucians, emerging during the Renaissance, a period of tremendous intellectual and cultural awakening. This mysterious organization appeared seemingly out of nowhere with radical ideas that challenged the established order of their time. Their teachings blended ancient wisdom with emerging scientific thought, promising spiritual enlightenment and hidden knowledge to those worthy of receiving it. What makes the Rosicrucians so fascinating isn't just their secretive nature, but the profound questions they force us to ask about knowledge, power, and the pursuit of truth. Were they real people meeting in hidden chambers, or merely a philosophical idea that took on a life of its own? Their manifestos spoke of invisible colleges, miraculous healing, and transformations both personal and societal, ideas so revolutionary that they sparked both admiration and fear across Europe. Even today, centuries after their first appearance, scholars and seekers continue to debate their true origins and purpose, uncovering connections to everything from alchemy and Freemasonry to modern psychological thought. This journey we're about to take together will explore the heart of these mysteries, tracing the Rosicrucians from their controversial beginnings through their enduring legacy. We'll examine their symbolic texts, their potential influence on historical figures, and why their message continues to resonate with those searching for deeper meaning in an increasingly transparent world. By understanding this enigmatic brotherhood, we not only uncover a fascinating chapter of hidden history, but also glimpse the eternal human desire to look beyond the visible world in search of greater truths. In 1614, a small, anonymous pamphlet appeared in the German city of Kassel, and its publication would act like a lit fuse on the European intellectual landscape. Titled the Fama Fraternitatis, or the Fame of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, this document was nothing short of a bombshell dropped into the heart of the Renaissance. It presented itself not as a theoretical work, but as a proclamation from a secret society that claimed to have existed for centuries, and it invited the learned and worthy of Europe to join its cause. The timing was perfect. The world was ripe for a revolution in thought, and the Fama offered a vision that was both utterly mysterious and tantalizingly possible. At its core, the Fama is a foundational myth, the origin story of the Rosicrucian order. It tells the tale of its founder, a German nobleman given the symbolic name Christian Rosenkreuz, which translates to Christian of the Rosy Cross. As a young man, Rosenkreuz embarked on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, but his journey took a dramatic detour. Instead of reaching Jerusalem, he ventured into the mysterious East, spending years in the legendary cities of Damascus, and most importantly, Fez in Morocco. It was there, the Fama claims, that he was initiated into ancient Arabian and African wisdom traditions, studying the hidden secrets of nature, mathematics, medicine, and magic knowledge that Europe had long since forgotten. After gathering this profound wisdom, Rosenkreuz returned to Europe, only to find his advanced ideas rejected by a scholarly establishment steeped in tradition. Undeterred, he gathered a small group of like-minded brothers and founded the Rosicrucian order, dedicating themselves to a sacred duty: healing the sick free of charge, acquiring and protecting ancient knowledge, and meeting in secret once a year at their mysterious headquarters, the House of the Holy Spirit. The document concludes with a stunning revelation. After Rosenkreuz's death, his body was placed in a hidden tomb. 120 years later, the Fama recounts, the brothers accidentally rediscovered this vault, a seven-sided chamber filled with incredible artifacts, illuminated by an inner sun, and containing the perfectly preserved body of their founder, holding a book of ultimate knowledge. This discovery signaled that the time had come for their wisdom to be brought into the open. The publication of the Fama ignited an intellectual frenzy unlike any other. Here was a document that claimed a secret society of supergeniuses existed, possessing the keys to universal knowledge, from the secrets of alchemy to the cure for all diseases. For scholars, scientists, and nobles tired of the slow pace of conventional learning and the dogmas of the Church, it was an irresistible call to action. The pamphlet spread like wildfire across Europe, translated into multiple languages and discussed in every major court and university. The most common reaction was not skepticism, but a desperate, determined effort to find these invisible brothers. Letters were written to anonymous post boxes mentioned in the text. Noblemen funded expeditions to locate the House of the Holy Spirit, and intellectuals published passionate appeals begging for contact. The Rosicrucian fever had taken hold, proving that the world was desperately hungry for a new synthesis of science, spirituality, and mystery. Just 1 year after the Fama set Europe ablaze with curiosity, a second document landed with the force of a philosophical thunderclap. Titled the Confessio Fraternitatis, or the Confession of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood, this follow-up manifesto was both a clarification and a deepening of the mystery. While the Fama was a story, a call to adventure, the Confessio was a declaration of principles, a dense and often cryptic text that laid out the Brotherhood's grand vision for a complete transformation of the world. It arrived at a time of immense religious and political tension, with Europe fractured by the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation and the constant threat of war, and its message was tailored for this age of uncertainty. The Confessio positioned the Rosicrucians not merely as learned men, but as divinely appointed agents of a coming universal reformation. It spoke of a new dawn of knowledge that would eclipse the light of the past, promising to unveil the secrets of nature that had been hidden since the biblical fall of man. This wasn't just about personal enlightenment, it was a blueprint for healing a broken world. The text is filled with a powerful, almost urgent tone, criticizing the corruption and vanity of the established religious and academic institutions of the day. It accused them of hoarding knowledge for prestige and profit, while the Rosicrucians pledged to share their wisdom freely with the worthy, aiming to relieve the miseries of the human condition. Perhaps the most intriguing aspects of the Confessio are its cryptic warnings and its use of complex symbolism. It openly mocks the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire, warning of their impending downfall, a dangerously radical statement for the time. The text is also layered with alchemical and astrological language, speaking of a magical language that unlocks nature's secrets and prophesying a period of great change initiated by celestial alignments. It promised that those with pure hearts and seeking minds would be able to decipher its deeper meanings, while the unworthy would dismiss it as foolishness. This created a powerful filter, making readers feel they were being tested, that the very act of struggling to understand the text was the first step toward initiation. Ultimately, the Confessio framed the Brotherhood as the guardians of a pristine, ancient wisdom of philosophy that predated and underpinned all major religions and sciences. This concept, known as the Philosophia Perennis, suggested that all true knowledge sprung from a single, divine source, and that the Rosicrucians were the current custodians of this unified truth. In an era defined by violent religious sectarianism, this was a revolutionary idea, that the path to God and understanding could be found not through dogma, but through the direct study of nature and the cosmos. The manifesto didn't just invite people to join a society, it invited them to participate in the ushering in of a new age for all of humanity, making the Rosicrucian mystery a cosmological imperative. If the first two manifestos lit a fire in the minds of Europe, the third and final text poured mystical fuel directly onto the flames, published in 1616, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz presents a narrative so rich with allegory that it has fascinated and confounded readers for over 4 centuries. Unlike the declarative proclamations of the Fama and Confessio, this work is a first-person account, a mystical diary penned by Christian Rosenkreuz himself, now an old man of 81 years, who receives a summons to attend a wondrous royal wedding at a magical castle. This shift from proclamation to personal journey is crucial. It moves the Rosicrucian invitation from an intellectual call to arms into the realm of direct experiential initiation. The story unfolds over 7 days, a structure deeply symbolic of both the 7 days of creation and the 7 stages of the alchemical process. Each day presents a new series of tests, wonders, and revelations for the narrator and the other guests, who are a collection of worthy seekers from across the land. From the very beginning, the tale is saturated with alchemical imagery. The invitation is delivered by a dazzling angelic woman whose robe is covered in stars and whose feet are like burnished brass, and the path to the castle is a perilous journey up a mountain with 3 paths, one short and dangerous, one long and safe, and one that is the true, winding Rosicrucian way, requiring both a guiding rope and a sincere heart to navigate. At the castle, the guests are subjected to a rigorous purification. They are weighed on a giant scale to assess their worthiness, and those found too light in virtue are turned away. This is not a physical test but a spiritual one, establishing that the wedding to come is an internal event, a marriage of opposing forces within the soul. The entire narrative builds toward the mystical union of the king and queen, who are not merely royal figures but personifications of the alchemical principles of sulfur and mercury, representing the masculine and feminine, solar and lunar, conscious and unconscious aspects of existence. Their marriage is the chemical wedding, the sacred fusion that creates the divine third, the philosopher's stone, a symbol of perfected consciousness and spiritual immortality. The process to achieve this union is neither simple nor gentle. It involves the figurative death and dismemberment of the royal figures, their bodies being dissolved in a fantastic alchemical apparatus to create a new, glorified form from their essence. Christian Rosenkreuz is given the humble but vital role of the porter of the tower, guarding the sacred process and witnessing the resurrection of the king and queen in radiant, transformed bodies. This entire ordeal is a powerful allegory for the inner work required of a true seeker. The death of the king and queen represents the necessary ego death, the breaking down of the old self through trials and introspection, so that a higher, more enlightened self can be synthesized and reborn. The chemical wedding is therefore the ultimate key to understanding the Rosicrucian path. While the Fama issued the public invitation and the Confessio outlined the philosophical rules, this text maps the inner journey itself. It shows that Rosicrucianism was never about simply acquiring hidden facts. It was about undergoing a profound personal metamorphosis. The promise of healing the sick and understanding nature's secrets outlined in the first manifestos is revealed here to be a consequence of this inner transformation. One must first achieve the mystical marriage within their own being, integrating their own opposing elements into a harmonious whole, before they can hope to heal or understand the outer world. This allegory cemented the Rosicrucian legacy as one of the most sophisticated and profound mystical traditions in the Western world. It provided a template for spiritual development that used the language of alchemy not as a literal recipe for turning lead into gold, but as a symbolic guide for turning the base metal of the human condition into the gold of enlightenment. The text concludes not with a grand pronouncement, but with Christian Rosenkreuz being knighted and adorned with a golden fleece, yet also charged with a vow of secrecy. He returns to his life, forever changed by the experience, carrying the inner light of the wedding within him, a perfect metaphor for the initiate who must live in the ordinary world while forever seeing it through extraordinary, transformed eyes. But this foundational story immediately presents us with a profound and enduring question. Was Christian Rosenkreuz a real historical person who walked the earth, or was he a powerful literary device, a symbolic figurehead created to embody an entire philosophy? The evidence, or rather the lack of it, suggests we are dealing with one of history's most compelling and enduring myths. The concept of a founder living for 106 years, a number rich with symbolic meaning in numerology and esoteric thought, immediately signals that we are in the realm of allegory rather than literal biography. His journey to mystical centers of learning like Damascus and Fez reads less like a travelogue and more like a map of the philosophical currents the Rosicrucians sought to synthesize, drawing from Eastern wisdom, Arabian mathematics, and Hermetic traditions. Many scholars and researchers have attempted to find a real man behind the legend. One prominent theory suggests that Christian Rosenkreuz was a symbolic stand-in for a real historical figure, perhaps the brilliant and enigmatic philosopher Johann Valentin André. André, a German theologian, was known to move in circles fascinated by esoterica and reform, and he later claimed, somewhat dismissively, that the chemical wedding was a youthful ludus or game. Others have proposed figures like the alchemist Paracelsus, whose revolutionary ideas on medicine and science certainly align with the Rosicrucian worldview, or even the visionary Sir Francis Bacon, whose own project for the advancement of learning shared striking similarities with the invisible college described in the manifestos. Yet no single candidate perfectly fits the description, and the search itself might be missing the point entirely. The true power of Christian Rosenkreuz likely lies in his role as an egregore, a thought form or collective personality conjured into being by the shared beliefs and intentions of a group. He is the perfect aspirational model, the ideal seeker who successfully integrates all knowledge, both divine and natural. His incredibly long lifespan symbolizes the timelessness of the wisdom he represents, a truth that transcends any single generation. His travels to the East reflect a core Renaissance idea, that true enlightenment required looking beyond the confines of European scholasticism to recover a purer, older wisdom that had been preserved in the Arab world. This symbolic interpretation, however, does not make him any less real in terms of his impact. The narrative of a single, heroic founder provided a crucial point of focus for a movement that was deliberately decentralized and secretive. It gave a name and a face to an otherwise abstract set of ideas, making the philosophy more relatable and its call to action more personal. For a 17th-century reader, being invited to follow in the footsteps of a specific, albeit mysterious, man was far more potent than being asked to subscribe to an unnamed collective. His mythical journey from rejection to ultimate vindication in his glorious tomb mirrored the potential journey of every reader who felt stifled by conventional authority, offering a template of hope, perseverance, and ultimate discovery. Therefore, the question of his historical existence may be the wrong puzzle to solve. The enduring mystery of Christian Rosenkreuz is not about finding his birth certificate or his grave. It is about understanding why this particular story resonated so powerfully. He represents the archetype of the enlightened initiate, the wise old man, and the seeker who returns with a gift for humanity. He is a symbol of the potential within every individual to embark on their own pilgrimage, to gather knowledge from diverse sources, and to ultimately achieve a personal transformation so complete that it can, in turn, help transform the world. He is both nobody and everybody, a fiction that contains a profound truth about the human quest for meaning. The publication of these manifestos did not simply spark curiosity. It ignited a full-blown intellectual firestorm that swept across a Europe already simmering with new ideas. This period, often called the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, saw the brotherhood's ideals seep into the very foundations of modern thought, influencing everything from the birth of modern science to the politics of the day. The call for a reformation of all knowledge arrived at a perfect historical moment, a time when the authority of the Church and the old scholastic traditions were being questioned as never before. For a continent weary of religious wars and dogmatic certainty, the Rosicrucian promise of a universal wisdom free from sectarian strife was an intoxicating vision. Thinkers of the highest caliber found themselves drawn into the debate, whether as admirers or skeptics. The great philosopher René Descartes was once accused of being a Rosicrucian himself, a rumor that apparently forced him to actively seek out members of the Brotherhood in Paris just to prove they did not exist. His entire philosophical project, with its radical doubt and quest for certain knowledge based on reason, mirrors the Rosicrucian desire to sweep away corrupt tradition and rebuild understanding from the ground up. Similarly, Sir Francis Bacon's blueprint for a new Atlantis, a utopian society governed by a scientific brotherhood in a hidden research center called Salomon's House, bears an uncanny resemblance to the Rosicrucian Invisible College. While direct links are debated, it is clear these visionary minds were breathing the same intellectual air, charged with the possibility of a collective, organized pursuit of truth. This fervor, however, was not met with universal applause. The reaction from established religious and political powers was swift and severe. The Roman Catholic Church, already embattled by the Protestant Reformation, saw the Rosicrucians not as harmless mystics but as a dangerous heretical sect. Their claims of possessing a knowledge superior to that of the Church, their use of alchemical and magical language, and their veiled criticisms of the papacy marked them as a direct threat. Lutheran authorities in Germany were equally suspicious, condemning the movement as a diabolical deception. The very invisibility of the order made it seem all the more perilous. How does one combat an enemy you cannot see, yet who seems to be everywhere? This led to a frantic wave of pamphlets and declarations, not from the Rosicrucians, but from their terrified opponents, who inadvertently spread the movement's fame even further through their attempts to suppress it. What emerged from this clash of adoration and condemnation was a profound cultural phenomenon, a unique fusion of Renaissance humanism and occult philosophy. The Rosicrucian ideal positioned humanity not as a lowly sinner, but as a powerful microcosm of the universe, capable of understanding and even mastering nature through the application of will and intellect. This was a magical humanism where the study of mathematics, geometry, and the natural world was not separate from the quest for spiritual enlightenment, but its essential foundation. The archetypal Rosicrucian was both a scientist and a mystic, studying the stars with a telescope while also contemplating their astrological significance, or experimenting with chemical reactions while seeking the alchemical gold of spiritual transformation. This synthesis created a new model for the intellectual seeker, one that would deeply influence the secret societies that followed, most notably Freemasonry. The Masonic lodges that began to flourish later in the 17th century adopted the Rosicrucian themes of brotherhood, initiation, progressive enlightenment, and the use of architecture and geometry as spiritual metaphors. The legacy of this firestorm is therefore not confined to history books. It shaped the undercurrents of the Enlightenment itself, providing an esoteric counterpart to the era's exaltation of reason. It insisted that the journey to a brighter future required not just logic, but also symbolism, intuition, and the perennial wisdom of the ages, a compelling argument that continues to resonate today. This intriguing connection between the Rosicrucian vision and the birth of modern science finds one of its most compelling threads in the founding of the Royal Society in 1660. The stated goal of this pioneering scientific institution, to pursue knowledge through experimental observation and to share its findings for the betterment of humanity, echoes the very promise laid out in the Rosicrucian manifestos half a century earlier. The concept of an invisible college, a network of learned individuals communicating in secret to advance understanding, seems to have leapt from the pages of the Fama Fraternitatis and into the drawing rooms of London, transforming from a mystical ideal into a tangible reality. Central to this fascinating overlap were key figures who seemed to operate in both worlds, none more so than Robert Boyle, often called the father of modern chemistry. While Boyle was a devout Christian and a rigorous experimentalist, his private letters and notebooks reveal a deep and serious engagement with alchemy, which he did not see as separate from his scientific pursuits. He spent years and considerable resources seeking the philosopher's stone, not merely for wealth, but believing it could possess profound medicinal and spiritual properties. This quest was pure Rosicrucian aspiration, the desire to unlock nature's deepest secrets for healing and enlightenment. Boyle even wrote passionately in defense of alchemists, arguing for their recognition as serious researchers, a plea that aligns perfectly with the Rosicrucian call for a reformation of learning that included hidden arts. Then there is the enigmatic figure of Elias Ashmole, an antiquarian, alchemist, and the founder of the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford's first public museum. Ashmole provides one of the most direct links, as he was not only a founding member of the Royal Society, but also one of the first accepted speculative Freemasons in England, a fraternity deeply influenced by Rosicrucian thought. His massive personal library was filled with esoteric texts, and he meticulously collected and transcribed alchemical manuscripts, treating them as vital records of a legitimate philosophical tradition. For Ashmole, the study of nature was a spiritual duty. Understanding the mechanics of the cosmos was a way to understand the mind of the divine. This worldview, which perfectly merges empirical inquiry with mystical reverence, is the very heart of the Rosicrucian synthesis. It is crucial to understand that for these early pioneers, there was no hard line between what we now call science and mysticism. The quest to turn lead into gold was simultaneously a physical experiment and a profound metaphor for personal and spiritual transformation. Astronomy and astrology were still intertwined disciplines. The movement of planets was studied both for its mechanical laws and its perceived symbolic meaning. The Royal Society's motto, nullius in verba, take nobody's word for it, was a radical command to trust direct observation over ancient authority. This spirit of questioning dogma was something the Rosicrucians had championed fiercely, even if their methods for verifying truth involved intuitive and symbolic understanding alongside physical experiment. The founding of the Royal Society can therefore be seen as a defining moment where the Rosicrucian seed, planted decades earlier, bore a very public and enduring fruit. The Invisible College stepped out of the shadows and into the light, institutionalizing the Brotherhood's core ideals of open collaboration and the systematic pursuit of knowledge. Yet, in doing so, it also began a process of splitting the unified worldview of the Renaissance. The how of natural phenomena became the domain of public science, while the why, the questions of ultimate purpose and spiritual meaning, increasingly retreated into the private realm of philosophy and esoteric societies. The Rosicrucian dream of a single, unified reformation of all knowledge gradually gave way to the specialization that defines the modern world. Yet its inspirational role in launching one of history's greatest scientific endeavors remains a powerful testament to the movement's profound and lasting influence. To truly grasp the heart of Rosicrucian philosophy, one must journey into the fascinating and often misunderstood world of alchemy. For the brothers of the Rosy Cross, alchemy was far more than a primitive precursor to chemistry or a futile quest for material wealth. It was a complete spiritual discipline, a sacred art that used the language of matter to describe the transformation of the soul. Their laboratories, as described in their texts, were not just rooms filled with furnaces and alembics. They were sanctums where the microcosm of the human being and the macrocosm of the universe met. Every process performed on a mineral, every calcination, dissolution, and coagulation, was a mirror reflecting a parallel process that the alchemists themselves had to undergo inwardly. The lead they sought to transmute was not merely a base metal, but the heavy, dull, and imperfect state of the unenlightened human condition. This profound inner work centered on two legendary goals that the Rosicrucians were rumored to have mastered: the creation of the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. To the uninitiated, these sound like mythic objects promising earthly immortality and infinite riches, and this superficial interpretation is what has often overshadowed their true symbolic meaning. The Philosopher's Stone was not conceived as a literal chunk of red rock, but rather as a perfected state of consciousness, a spiritual substance that could touch and transform anything it contacted. In the same way, this legendary stone was said to transmute base metals into gold. The enlightened awareness of an initiate could transmute base human experiences, suffering, ignorance, and desire into the gold of wisdom, compassion, and understanding. It represented the ultimate achievement of the alchemical work, the creation of a stable, illuminated self, immune to the corruption and chaos of the ordinary world. Similarly, the elixir of life, or the panacea, was far more than a mere potion for extending physical years. While the manifestos do speak of healing the sick, the ultimate healing they promised was from spiritual death, the sleep of ignorance that keeps humanity trapped in a cycle of materialism and strife. The elixir symbolizes the infusion of divine vitality into the soul, a rejuvenating energy that awakens higher faculties of perception and grants a timeless quality to one's existence. To drink this elixir was to achieve a state of vibrant spiritual health where one truly lived, fully conscious and connected to the source of all life, rather than merely enduring a physical lifespan. This is why the Rosicrucians offered to heal without charge. The true medicine they valued was not for sale, as it was the knowledge of how to achieve this inner wholeness. The entire alchemical process, therefore, was a meticulous roadmap for psycho-spiritual development. It began with the nigredo, or the blackening stage, a period of profound purification often symbolized by putrefaction or death. For the seeker, this is the essential first step of confronting one's own shadow, the fears, flaws, and ego-driven desires that cloud true perception. It is a difficult, dark night of the soul where everything one thought they knew is broken down. This is followed by the albedo, the whitening, representing a washing away of impurities and the emergence of a purified, receptive state of mind, open to higher influences. Finally, the rubedo, the reddening, signifies the culmination, the marriage of opposites within the soul, the birth of the stone, and the emergence of the fully realized, illuminated individual. This is the chemical wedding made manifest within the alchemists themselves. The Rosicrucian approach to alchemy perfectly encapsulates their entire mission. They took an ancient, secretive art and presented it as a path available to any sincere individual willing to undertake the laborious work on themselves. Their purported mastery was not about hoarding a physical substance of power, but about embodying a principle of transformation. By framing enlightenment in the tangible terms of laboratory processes, they made the intangible journey of the soul accessible, concrete, and urgent. The fire in their furnaces was the fire of intense concentration and divine love, and the gold they sought to create was a humanity restored to its original, radiant nature, capable of ushering in that age of wisdom and peace they so fervently proclaimed. Yet this very elusiveness forces us to confront the most captivating question of all. Were the Rosicrucians ever a real, organized society meeting in secret, or were they a brilliant and potent fiction from the very start? The historical record is as murky and fragmented as an alchemist's glassware, offering hints and possibilities but no definitive proof. Scholars have scoured archives across Europe for centuries, searching for membership rosters, minutes from clandestine meetings, or any tangible evidence of a formal brotherhood operating under that name in the early 17th century. The result of this search is, for the most part, a resounding silence. No such documents have ever been conclusively found, which for many historians points to a simple conclusion. The Rosicrucians were a literary hoax, a thought experiment that captured the imagination of a generation desperate for change. However, the possibility of some form of organized activity is tantalizing and cannot be entirely dismissed. The most plausible theory suggests that the published manifestos were not a call to form a new group, but rather the public announcement of one or several pre-existing, secretive circles of intellectuals, alchemists, and reformers operating in Germany. These would have been small, private gatherings of like-minded individuals, perhaps meeting in the libraries or private laboratories of wealthy patrons, discussing the very ideas of mystical Christianity, alchemy, and universal reformation that the texts describe. They would have had no need for a formal name or structure. Their bond was their shared pursuit of hidden knowledge. The manifestos, then, could be seen as a cunning recruitment drive, a way to signal to other potential seekers across Europe that they were not alone and that a network of enlightened thought was being woven behind the scenes. This idea is supported by the specific and often local knowledge displayed in the texts. The Fama Fraternitatis, for instance, mentions the city of Kassel and the nearby abbey of Haina with surprising familiarity, suggesting its author had direct ties to that region. Furthermore, the response to the manifestos was not uniform confusion. A number of published replies from the era demonstrate a deep understanding of the complex philosophical and alchemical concepts within them, implying these readers were already initiated into similar lines of thinking. It seems unlikely that such nuanced responses could have come from people encountering these radical ideas for the very first time. This points to a landscape dotted with isolated cells of thinkers who recognized in the Rosicrucian pamphlets a reflection of their own private studies and aspirations. The enduring power of the Rosicrucian myth, however, lies precisely in this lack of certainty. Their chosen invisibility was not a failure but a feature of their genius. By never stepping forward to claim credit or provide proof, they forced every reader to become an active participant in the mystery. Each person who read the Fama had to decide for themselves, was this real? And in that moment of questioning, the seeker was initiated into the first and most important Rosicrucian lesson. That truth is not something handed down by authority, but something to be pursued, questioned, and ultimately discovered within oneself. The Brotherhood's power derived from its status as a blank canvas upon which an entire age could project its highest hopes for a wiser, more enlightened future. This strategic ambiguity is what allowed the idea to be adopted and adapted by so many groups that followed. Within decades, Freemasons began incorporating Rosicrucian themes and symbols into their own rituals, creating specific Masonic degrees focused on the Rosy Cross. In the 18th and 19th centuries, entirely new organizations like the Golden Dawn and Amorc emerged, explicitly claiming the Rosicrucian mantle and constructing entire initiatory systems around it. These groups, whether they held a direct historical lineage or not, became the custodians of the living tradition, proving that the essence of Rosicrucianism is not in a historical pedigree but in the perpetual and timeless appeal of its core ideals. The pursuit of wisdom, the unity of science and spirituality, and the belief in humanity's potential for inner transformation. The question of their historical reality becomes almost secondary to their undeniable reality as one of the most influential and enduring philosophical forces in Western esoteric thought. To truly understand the Rosicrucian worldview, we must learn to read their language, a visual lexicon of symbols that conveyed profound truths to the initiated while remaining opaque to the unworthy. At the heart of this symbolic system, and indeed the Brotherhood's very identity, is the Rosy Cross itself. This is not a standard Christian cross, it is a complex emblem rich with layered meaning. Typically depicted as a golden cross with a single, perfect rose blooming at its center, this image represents the ultimate synthesis of the Rosicrucian path. The cross symbolizes the material world, the body, and suffering, the necessary crucible of transformation. The rose represents the soul, divine beauty, and the unfolding of consciousness through stages of enlightenment, its petals hinting at secrecy and the gradual revelation of truth. Together, they illustrate the core alchemical and spiritual goal, the manifestation of the divine, the rose, within the realm of matter and human experience, the cross. It is a map for the individual's journey, showing that spiritual awakening is not an escape from the world, but a flowering within it. Another powerful and recurring symbol is that of the pelican feeding its young with blood from its own breast. To the modern eye, this might seem strangely violent, but to a Renaissance scholar, it was a deeply resonant image of self-sacrifice and divine love. The pelican was a traditional Christian symbol for Christ's sacrifice on the cross, shedding his blood for the salvation of humanity. The Rosicrucians adopted this symbol to represent the ultimate duty of the true adept, not to hoard knowledge for personal gain, but to willingly sacrifice their own time, energy, and ego to nourish and elevate others. It also holds a potent alchemical meaning. In the laboratory, the pelican was the name for a specific type of glassware designed to circulate condensed vapor back into the mixture, a process of self-feeding purification essential for achieving the magnum opus or great work. Thus, the symbol perfectly merges the spiritual and the practical, embodying the ideal of a wisdom that circulates and renews itself for the benefit of all. The immortal phoenix, the mythical bird that cyclically dies in flames only to be reborn from its own ashes, serves as a master symbol for the entire process of alchemical transformation the Rosicrucians championed. It is the ultimate emblem of the rubido, the final red stage of the work where the alchemist achieves a glorious resurrection into a new state of being. The phoenix's death by fire represents the necessary destruction of the old, base self, the ego, outdated beliefs, and worldly attachments through the purifying fire of intense introspection and spiritual trial. Its rebirth signifies the emergence of the enlightened, perfected self, the philosopher's stone in human form which possesses eternal vitality. This symbol offered a powerful message of hope and renewal, promising that through dedicated inner work, one could overcome spiritual death and be reborn into a higher state of consciousness, just as the manifestos promised a new dawn of knowledge would rebirth a sleeping world. Beyond these iconic creatures and objects, the manifestos and associated texts are filled with intricate geometric diagrams and architectural plans, most famously the schematic of Father R. C.'s seven-sided vault. Geometry was not merely mathematics to the Renaissance mind, it was sacred language, a reflection of the divine order underlying the chaos of the visible world. The compass, the square, and the plumb line were not just tools of the stonemason but symbols of moral and intellectual precision. The 7 sides of the tomb correspond to the 7 known planets of the time, the 7 days of creation, and the 7 stages of the alchemical process, framing the vault as a microcosm of a perfectly ordered universe. These diagrams were puzzles and invitations, suggesting that by understanding the principles of sacred geometry, one could understand the very architecture of God's creation, and by extension, the structure of one's own soul, building an inner temple of wisdom as perfect and harmonious as any geometric form. Perhaps one of the most compelling and controversial narratives woven around the Rosicrucian enigma is its proposed connection to another legendary order of knights and bankers, the Knights Templar. This theory suggests the Rosicrucians were not a new creation of the 17th century, but the intellectual heirs of the Templars, who allegedly survived their official dissolution in the early 14th century and went underground, preserving their secrets and their mission. Proponents of this idea point to a tantalizing, though highly speculative, historical timeline. The Knights Templar were suppressed in 1314, while the Fama Fraternitatis places the death of Christian Rosenkreuz in 1484, leaving a gap of roughly 170 years. Could this period represent a clandestine era where Templar traditions were kept alive, only to re-emerge rebranded under the Rosy Cross? The most immediate and visually striking link between the two groups is, of course, the symbol of the cross itself. The Knights Templar wore a distinct red cross on their white mantles, a badge granted to them by the Church. the Rosicrucians, as their name declares, are defined by the Rosy Cross. While the Templar cross was typically a plain Greek or Latin cross, the Rosicrucian emblem is far more complex, incorporating the rose. Yet, the shared use of the color red is provocative. For the Templars, the red cross was a symbol of martyrdom and their willingness to shed blood for the Christian faith. For the Rosicrucians, red is the color of the rubedo, the final and highest stage of the alchemical process, representing spiritual perfection and the dawn of a new consciousness. The theory posits that the Rosicrucians adopted and alchemized the Templar symbol, transforming an emblem of outward, holy warfare into one of inward, spiritual transformation. Beyond the visual, the theory draws parallels in the alleged activities and fates of both orders. The Knights Templar were accused of heresy, secret rituals, and possessing arcane knowledge gleaned from their time in the Middle East. Similarly, the Rosicrucians were accused of witchcraft, heresy, and holding forbidden secrets from the Orient. Both groups were portrayed by their enemies as shadowy, all-powerful networks operating with a hidden agenda that threatened the established powers of church and state. This shared narrative of persecuted wisdom, of a noble and enlightened group being hunted by a fearful and corrupt authority, creates a powerful mythical resonance that makes the connection feel intuitively true to many, even in the absence of concrete historical evidence. It is crucial to understand, however, that this grand synthesis was largely constructed and popularized centuries after the fact by the occult revivalists of the 18th and 19th centuries. As Freemasonry grew in prominence, its lodges began to develop elaborate, high degrees that wove together historical and mythical threads to create a more dramatic and prestigious origin story for themselves. The story of the murdered Templar Grand Master Jacques de Molay and the legend of his surviving knights became a central pillar of this Masonic mythology. Groups like the rectified Scottish Rite and the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite explicitly linked themselves to a supposed Templar tradition. Since the Rosicrucians were already a respected part of the esoteric landscape, it was a natural next step for these 19th century system builders to connect the two, creating an unbroken lineage of hidden masters stretching back to the Crusades or even to antiquity. This drive to create a philosophia perennis, a single, secret tradition underlying all world religions and esoteric systems, was a hallmark of the era. Authors and occultists like Eliphas Levi and later the founders of the Golden Dawn sought to organize all magical knowledge into a coherent whole. A direct line from the Templars to the Rosicrucians to the Freemasons provided a satisfying and elegant historical framework for this perennial philosophy. It gave modern seekers a proud and heroic ancestry, transforming their esoteric studies from a personal hobby into participation in a centuries-old cosmic war between enlightenment and ignorance. This narrative was incredibly effective, not because it was historically accurate, but because it was spiritually and psychologically powerful, offering a sense of belonging and purpose. In the end, the Templar connection stands as a fascinating case study in how history and myth interact to shape our understanding of the past. While most academic historians find little credible evidence to support a direct organizational link between the suppressed Knights Templar and the sudden appearance of the Rosicrucian manifestos, the symbolic and thematic connections are undeniable and deeply meaningful. The theory tells us less about the actual origins of the Rosicrucians and more about the enduring human desire to find patterns, continuity, and hidden hands guiding the course of history. It demonstrates how later movements project their own ideals and needs onto the past, creating a usable mythology that inspires and empowers new generations of seekers. Whether fact or powerful fiction, the idea of this secret lineage has become an undeniable part of the Rosicrucian legacy, enriching its mystery and amplifying its allure for centuries. To fully appreciate the Rosicrucian phenomenon, we must step into the turbulent world of early 17th century Europe, a continent being torn apart by faith. The Protestant Reformation, ignited a century earlier by Martin Luther, had shattered the millennium-old unity of Western Christendom. What began as a theological debate had hardened into entrenched political and military alliances, creating a pervasive atmosphere of suspicion, censorship, and escalating violence. It was into this powder keg that the Rosicrucian manifestos were thrown, and their message resonated precisely because it spoke directly to the deepest anxieties and highest aspirations of the age. Many scholars view Rosicrucianism not as a random occurrence, but as a specifically Protestant form of mysticism. The Catholic Church had long maintained a rich mystical tradition with its saints, monasteries, and meditative practices. The Protestant rejection of papal authority and many church rituals, however, created a spiritual vacuum, a yearning for direct, personal experience of the divine that wasn't mediated by a priest, but that also went beyond the often dry theological disputes of the emerging Protestant orthodoxy. The Rosicrucians offered a thrilling alternative. They presented a path to spiritual knowledge that was deeply Christian in its symbolism, yet entirely individual and experiential. It was a reformation of the soul itself, parallel to Luther's reformation of the Church. Their promise of a universal wisdom, a philosophia perennis, appealed to those who were weary of sectarian hatred but still sought a profound connection to God, bypassing the doctrinal battles altogether. Their call for reformation, however, was far more radical and comprehensive than anything that had come before. Luther and other reformers had focused on religious doctrine and church practice. The Rosicrucians, by contrast, envisioned a total reformation of all human knowledge and society. They sought to heal the schism not between Catholics and Protestants, but between faith and reason, between science and spirituality. Their manifestos criticize both the intellectual stagnation of the universities and the corruption within the churches, proposing instead an invisible college where the search for truth would be pursued without dogma. This was a vision of progress, suggesting that humanity could advance toward a brighter future through the application of ancient wisdom and new discoveries, a powerful idea that placed them far ahead of their time. They were not calling for a return to a purer past, but for a leap forward into a more enlightened age. The timing of their appearance was almost prophetically ominous. The first manifesto was published in 1614. Just 4 years later, in 1618, the continent would erupt into the 30 Years' War, a catastrophic conflict that remains one of the most devastating in European history. It was a war fueled by religious factionalism, political ambition, and dynastic rivalry, which would eventually draw in nearly every major power and devastate the German states in particular, where the Rosicrucian texts first emerged. As this war of unimaginable brutality began to unfold, the mysterious, invisible brotherhood took on an entirely new aura. In a world descending into visible, tangible hell, the idea of a secret society of enlightened sages working behind the scenes to enact a universal reformation became a beacon of desperate hope for many. Their invisibility became their greatest asset and the source of their enduring legend. As armies marched across Germany, leaving destruction and famine in their wake, the Rosicrucians could not be found. They were not in the courts of warring princes or the halls of bickering theologians. This led to wild speculation. Were they hiding, waiting for the storm to pass? Were they moving invisibly through the chaos, performing secret works of mercy? Or were they perhaps not a physical group at all, but a spiritual force whose time had not yet come? The palpable failure of visible institutions, churches that blessed opposing armies, kings who sacrificed their people for power, made an invisible, apolitical brotherhood dedicated to healing and knowledge seem not just mysterious but profoundly noble. The very chaos of the war served to validate their critique of the existing world order and burnish their reputation as bearers of a purer, more peaceful wisdom, a legend born from the fires of one of history's darkest chapters. This profound intertwining of Rosicrucian thought with the emerging ideals of science created a powerful philosophical current, and it found a remarkably durable vessel for its survival in the fraternal organization of Freemasonry. As the 17th century gave way to the 18th, the speculative Masonic lodges that began flourishing across Europe were not merely social clubs. They were crucibles of Enlightenment ideas, and they proved to be exceptionally fertile ground for the seeds of Rosicrucian wisdom. The Masons already had a framework built on allegory, moral instruction through the symbols of the stonemason's trade, and a commitment to brotherhood across religious and social divides. The Rosicrucian influence provided a deeper, more mystical layer to this structure, transforming the lodge from a place of philosophical discussion into a theater of spiritual initiation. The most explicit and enduring symbol of this merger is the creation of the 18th degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, known universally as the Knight of the Rose Croix. This degree, which emerged in France around the mid-18th century, is a full-scale dramatic ritual that brings the core themes of the Rosicrucian manifestos to life. The candidate undergoes a profound journey that mirrors the allegory of Christian Rosenkreuz, seeking a lost word of ultimate meaning. The ceremony is steeped in the symbolism of the passion, alchemical transformation, and the promise of immortality, culminating not in a physical vault, but in a spiritual revelation centered on the tenets of faith, hope, and charity, represented by the three primary colors of the alchemical process and the three pillars of the lodge. By incorporating this degree, Freemasonry did not just pay homage to the Rosicrucians, it effectively institutionalized their quest for spiritual light and made it a formal, repeatable stage within a structured path of moral and philosophical advancement. Beyond this specific degree, the Rosicrucian imprint can be seen in the very symbolic language of Masonry. The concept of the lost word that Masons seek to restore is deeply aligned with the Rosicrucian idea of a primordial, universal wisdom that has been fragmented and hidden through the ages. The Masonic emphasis on the building of a spiritual temple, an inner Solomon's temple, is a direct parallel to the Rosicrucian goal of personal transformation and the construction of a perfected consciousness. The tools of the Mason, the compass for drawing circles representing the spiritual realm, and the square for measuring right angles representing the material world, became instruments for achieving the same synthesis of heaven and earth, spirit and matter, that the Rosicrucian alchemists sought in their laboratories. The lodge itself became a symbolic reflection of the Rosicrucian vault, a sacred space where the divine order of the cosmos could be studied and embodied. This adoption was not a one-way street, it was a symbiotic relationship that guaranteed the survival of Rosicrucian ideas. The Masonic framework provided something the original, invisible brotherhood lacked: a robust organizational structure with established lodges, recorded memberships, and standardized rituals. This gave the esoteric teachings a permanent home and a mechanism for transmission from one generation to the next. As Freemasonry spread across the globe through trade, colonialism, and military campaigns, it carried these synthesized ideas with it. A merchant or soldier initiated in a lodge in Edinburgh or Paris could find a familiar philosophical home in a lodge in Calcutta or Boston, and within that fellowship he would encounter the symbols and themes of the Rosy Cross. In this way, Masonic lodges became the quiet, steady carriers of the Rosicrucian flame, ensuring that its light continued to burn long after the initial frenzy of the manifestos had faded into history, seamlessly integrating a mysterious European legend into the very fabric of modern esoteric tradition. To truly grasp the revolutionary nature of Rosicrucian thought, we must trace its roots back to two powerful streams of ancient wisdom that flowed into the Renaissance mind: the philosophical currents of Hermeticism and the mystical depths of Kabbalah. The Rosicrucians did not invent their philosophy from nothing. They were master synthesizers, brilliant architects of the spirit who took these disparate ancient traditions and fused them into a new and potent Christian mystical framework. Their genius lay in their ability to demonstrate that the spiritual truths found in the Bible were not in conflict with these older wisdom systems, but were in fact the same universal laws expressed through a different, divinely inspired language. The first major influence, Hermeticism, takes its name from the legendary sage Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice greatest Hermes, a figure believed in the Renaissance to be a contemporary of Moses who possessed primordial wisdom. The core texts of this tradition, known as the Corpus Hermeticum, were rediscovered in the 15th century and brought to Florence, where they were translated and passionately studied. These texts presented a breathtaking vision of the cosmos as a living, intelligent, and interconnected whole, governed by the principle, as above, so below. This famous axiom meant that the patterns of the heavens were reflected in the events of the earthly realm, and most importantly, within the microcosm of the human being. For the Rosicrucians, this was a foundational idea. It meant that by studying the stars and planets, one could understand the forces at play within their own soul, and by mastering their own inner world, they could potentially influence their outer reality. This provided a philosophical justification for their work in astrology, alchemy, and natural magic, framing it not as superstition but as a sacred science of correspondences. Jewish Kabbalah, the second profound influence, offered the Rosicrucians an intricate map of the divine realm and a methodology for ascending back to God. Originally a deeply mystical and esoteric tradition within Judaism, Kabbalah was adopted and adapted by Christian scholars like Giovanni Pico della Mirandola and Johannes Reuchlin, who argued that it contained hidden proofs of Christian theology. The Rosicrucians eagerly embraced this Christianized Kabbalah. They were particularly drawn to its central symbol, the Tree of Life, a diagram of 10 spheres, or Sephiroth, representing the emanations through which the infinite, unknowable God creates and sustains the universe. This map provided a structured path for spiritual ascent, a way for the mystic to navigate the layers of reality and achieve union with the divine. Furthermore, Kabbalistic techniques like gematria, finding hidden meanings through the numerical values of Hebrew letters, offered a method for unlocking deeper layers of scripture, allowing the Rosicrucians to read the Bible as a complex cryptographic text filled with scientific and spiritual secrets waiting to be decoded by the enlightened mind. The Rosicrucian synthesis was breathtaking in its ambition. They took the Hermetic view of a magically interconnected universe and combined it with the Kabbalistic map of the soul's journey back to God, all while framing it within a Protestant Christian context that emphasized personal revelation over institutional authority. A perfect example of this fusion is their reinterpretation of the central Christian figure of Jesus Christ. In their framework, Christ was not only the Savior who died for humanity's sins, but also the ultimate embodiment of the philosopher's stone and the perfect Kabbalistic Adam Kadmon, or primordial man. His resurrection was the ultimate alchemical transformation, the rubido achieved, proving that the spiritual process of death and rebirth was not just a metaphor but a tangible reality accessible to all who followed the path. This made spiritual enlightenment an immanent possibility, a direct and personal experience of the divine that did not require the permission of a church. This unique framework promised something extraordinary for its time, a spiritual enlightenment achievable through direct study and practice. It democratized mysticism. One did not need to be a cloistered monk or a rabbinic scholar. A sincere seeker with a willing mind could study the laws of nature as revealed in Hermetic philosophy, purify their soul using the stages of the alchemical process, and navigate their consciousness upward using the Kabbalistic tree of life as a guide. The ultimate goal was to achieve what they called the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, a state of unbreakable communion with one's higher divine self. This was the real secret. The Rosicrucians guarded not a specific recipe or a magical phrase, but a complete and integrated system for self-divinization, a way for a human being to consciously participate in their own spiritual evolution and become a conscious co-creator with God, thereby fulfilling the divine purpose of the great reformation they were destined to bring about. While their spiritual and philosophical messages are profound, a compelling layer of the Rosicrucian mystery suggests these documents were far more than ethereal guides. They were potentially sophisticated political weapons, carefully timed and crafted to influence the high-stakes power struggles of 17th century Europe. To understand this, we must look at the specific political landscape into which the Fama and Confessio were launched. Central Europe, particularly the German states, was a fragmented patchwork of principalities and electorates, all part of the volatile Holy Roman Empire. Tensions were simmering between a Catholic emperor who sought to consolidate power and roll back the gains of the Protestant Reformation, and a coalition of Protestant princes determined to protect their religious and political autonomy. It was a tinderbox waiting for a spark, and the Rosicrucian manifestos may have been precisely that. The most tantalizing political theory links the documents directly to the court of Frederick V, the Elector Palatine. Frederick and his brilliant, ambitious wife, Elizabeth Stuart, were the great hopes of European Protestantism. They ruled from Heidelberg, a renowned center of learning and tolerance, and their court attracted some of the brightest minds of the era, including many suspected of having ties to the Rosicrucian circle. The manifesto's publication coincided perfectly with Frederick's rising political ambitions. Their scathing criticism of the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire aligned perfectly with Frederick's opposition to Catholic Habsburg power. Even more suggestive is the language used. The promise of a new dawn and a universal reformation led by a hidden, enlightened brotherhood could easily be interpreted as a coded endorsement of Frederick's potential leadership of the Protestant cause, positioning him as the champion of a new, enlightened age. This theory reaches its climax with the event that would define Frederick's legacy, his acceptance of the crown of Bohemia in 1619. The Protestant nobility of Bohemia had rebelled against their Catholic Habsburg king, Emperor Ferdinand II, and offered the throne to Frederick. This was a direct challenge to imperial authority, and accepting it meant war. When Frederick said yes, he became the symbolic Winter King, his reign destined to be brief but spectacular. The Rosicrucian manifestos, published in the years immediately leading up to this crisis, can be read as a propaganda campaign designed to build ideological support for his claim. The texts didn't just offer spiritual hope, they provided a theological and philosophical justification for a Protestant monarchy that could wield both temporal and spiritual authority, a king who was not just a ruler but a philosopher adept ushering in a new golden age. The manifestos themselves are filled with what can be construed as political signals. The Confessio Fraternitatis, in particular, is remarkably bold in its anti-papal rhetoric and its predictions of the downfall of corrupt empires. This wasn't just spiritual allegory, it was seditious material that could get someone executed. By publishing such ideas anonymously, the authors could spread a radical political message with plausible deniability. The call for the learned and worthy of Europe to join the Brotherhood can be seen as an attempt to build an international network of intellectual and political support for the Protestant cause, centered around Frederick's court. The promised reformation was not merely personal, it was profoundly geopolitical, envisioning a restructuring of the entire European order away from Habsburg and papal dominance and toward a new league of enlightened Protestant states. Of course, this ambitious political gambit, if that is indeed what it was, ended in catastrophic failure. Frederick's forces were defeated at the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, marking the beginning of the devastating 30 Years' War. Frederick and Elizabeth were driven into exile, their court scattered, their dreams of a new dawn extinguished in a single afternoon. The Rosicrucians, who had promised so much, suddenly fell silent. Their invisibility, once a source of power, now seemed like a retreat in the face of harsh political reality. This failure, however, does not negate the political reading of the texts, it simply reveals the high-risk nature of the game being played. The manifestos remain a stunning example of how esoteric ideas and spiritual yearning can be powerfully harnessed to serve a concrete political vision, a testament to the enduring belief that true change requires a revolution not just of governments but of the human spirit itself. The radiant promise of a new dawn quickly curdled into a storm of fear and condemnation. The same ideas that electrified forward-thinking seekers struck the established powers of Europe as a profound and dangerous threat. The backlash was not isolated to one side of the religious divide. It was a rare moment of unity between Catholic and Protestant authorities, both of whom saw the invisible brotherhood as a heresy that undermined their very foundations. From the pulpits of Rome to the lecture halls of Lutheran Germany, a coordinated campaign of persecution began to take shape, transforming the Rosicrucian dream into a dangerous fantasy for those associated with it. The Catholic Church's response was swift and severe. In 1623, the powerful Roman Inquisition issued a formal condemnation, branding the Rosicrucians as a depraved and heretical sect. The Jesuits, the intellectual shock troops of the Counter-Reformation, led the charge with a series of fiery pamphlets and sermons. One particularly influential Jesuit scholar, Johann Roberti, dedicated years of his life to hunting down and discrediting Rosicrucian ideas, declaring them a diabolical deception designed to lead the faithful into error. The Church saw their claims of superior knowledge as a direct challenge to its authority as the sole arbiter of divine truth, and their use of magic and alchemy smelled of the demonic. This was not a philosophical disagreement, it was a spiritual war against an invisible enemy, and the Inquisition was determined to burn it out wherever it might be found. Perhaps surprisingly, the reaction from many Protestant leaders was equally vicious. While the Rosicrucian manifestos had emerged from a broadly Protestant cultural milieu, their mystical and magical elements were deeply suspect to Orthodox Lutheran and Calvinist theologians who preached a religion based on faith and scripture alone. The idea that one could achieve spiritual enlightenment through alchemical practices or contact with hidden masters was seen as a form of enthusiasm or works righteousness, a dangerous deviation from the core doctrine of salvation by grace. In the fiercely competitive intellectual environment of Protestant universities, professors who felt their authority threatened by the invisible college were often the first to cry heresy, accusing the brotherhood of promoting a dangerous blend of paganism and sorcery that would bring divine wrath upon the German nation. This condemnation moved swiftly from words to action. Authorities across Europe began a concerted effort to seek out and destroy Rosicrucian texts. Booksellers found themselves under pressure to cease carrying the manifestos and any associated commentaries. Private libraries were scrutinized, and owning such material became grounds for suspicion. There are accounts of public burnings of Rosicrucian-associated works, the flames consuming not just the infamous Fama and Confessio, but also the works of revered alchemists like Paracelsus, whose writings were seen as a gateway to this new heresy. This suppression created a climate of intense fear, forcing intellectuals and noblemen who were privately sympathetic to dissemble and hide their interests, lest they be accused of consorting with demons or plotting against the state. The escalating horror of the 30 Years' War provided the perfect cover for this persecution. As chaos engulfed the German states, accusations of Rosicrucianism could be a death sentence. A mysterious stranger, a scholar with unusual interests, or a nobleman with a well-stocked library could easily be denounced as an agent of the invisible brotherhood, a convenient scapegoat for the inexplicable tragedies of war. The very invisibility of the order, once its greatest mystique, now made everyone a potential suspect and no one safe. This atmosphere of paranoia and danger made it impossible for any group openly identifying as Rosicrucian to survive. Whatever circles had existed were forced to dissolve, go deeper underground, or cloak their activities in even more impenetrable layers of secrecy. This forced disappearance did not kill the Rosicrucian idea, it paradoxically guaranteed its immortality. Driven from the public square, the movement fragmented into countless tiny streams, seeping into the substrata of European culture. Individual seekers continued their studies in absolute privacy, and the core ideals of the Brotherhood found refuge within other, more durable containers. The Masonic lodges, with their established structures and vows of secrecy, became a perfect new home, a place where the symbolism of the Rosy Cross could be preserved and practiced away from the prying eyes of church and state. The persecution had failed to eradicate the philosophy, succeeding only in burnishing its legend, confirming its status as a knowledge so powerful and dangerous that the authorities of the world would unite to try and stamp it out. Just when the Rosicrucian flame seemed to have been extinguished by persecution and war, it erupted once more in a dazzling new form, this time not as a call from the shadows but as a highly structured and influential power at the very heart of European aristocracy. Emerging in the mid-18th century, the Order of the Gold and Rosy Cross, or Orden des Gold und Rosenkreuzes, represented a dramatic evolution from the mysterious brotherhood of the original manifestos. This was no longer an invisible college of idealistic thinkers. It was a tightly organized secret society with a rigid hierarchy, elaborate rituals, and a powerful political agenda that would captivate the minds of kings and princes across the continent. In many ways, this revival was a direct reaction to the sweeping changes of the Age of Enlightenment. Where the early Rosicrucians had been revolutionaries seeking to overturn the old order, the Gold und Rosenkreuz positioned themselves as guardians of a sacred tradition, pushing back against the rising tide of rationalism, materialism, and what they saw as the dangerous secularism of philosophers like Voltaire. The structure of this new order was meticulously detailed, featuring a strict 9-grade initiation system that promised adepts a gradual ascent into the innermost circles of power and wisdom. A prospective member would begin as a junior, then progress through phases like Theoricus, Practicus, and Philosophus, each stage revealing deeper layers of alchemical and spiritual knowledge. The highest grades, Adeptus Minor, Adeptus Major, and finally Magus, were said to grant the initiate not only profound philosophical understanding, but also the practical ability to perform the great work of alchemy itself. This complex ladder of advancement created a powerful sense of exclusivity and purpose, binding members together with vows of secrecy and a shared belief that they were part of a divine mission to restore spiritual balance to a world they perceived as falling into chaos and unbelief. Their rituals were intensely theatrical, involving symbolic journeys, passwords, signs, and grips, all designed to impart esoteric lessons and reinforce the absolute authority of the order's unknown superiors. Perhaps the most astonishing aspect of the Gold und Rosenkreuz's influence was its penetration of the highest echelons of European power. Their most famous, though reluctant, associate was Frederick the Great, King of Prussia. While Frederick himself was a staunch rationalist who famously surrounded himself with Enlightenment thinkers, his court, and most intriguingly, his own brother, Prince Henry of Prussia, were deeply involved with the order. The society actively recruited among the nobility, understanding that the path to a counter-enlightenment required influence over those who held temporal power. They presented their blend of mystical Christianity, operative alchemy, and conservative politics as an antidote to the radical ideas threatening the traditional monarchical order. This strategy proved remarkably effective, with chapters or circles establishing themselves in Berlin, Vienna, Munich, and St. Petersburg, effectively creating a clandestine network of aristocratic Rosicrucians who believed they were steering the fate of nations from behind the scenes. The order's teachings were a fascinating and potent fusion of the practical and the spiritual, At its core remained the pursuit of the philosopher's stone, but for the Gold and Rosicrucians, this was not merely a metaphor. They fervently believed in the physical reality of alchemical transmutation and dedicated immense resources to laboratory work, convinced that producing gold was not just a source of wealth but a tangible sign of divine favor and spiritual attainment. This practical alchemy was seamlessly woven into a complex theological framework that viewed the fall of man as a cosmic catastrophe that had corrupted nature itself. The alchemist's work, therefore, was a sacred duty to help redeem and purify the material world, restoring it to its prelapsarian perfection. This mission gave their activities a profound religious significance, framing their resistance to the Enlightenment as a holy war against forces that would sever humanity's connection to the divine and reduce the universe to a mere machine. Ultimately, the story of the Gold and Rosicrucians is one of paradox. They were a secret society that sought very public influence, a mystical order deeply engaged in the politics of its time, and a revival of a movement born from radical reformation that now championed conservative reaction. Their legacy is complex. While they failed to halt the advance of the Enlightenment, they demonstrated the enduring power of the Rosicrucian myth to adapt and reinvent itself for a new age. They provided a template for the modern secret society, hierarchical, ritualistic, and politically engaged, that would be emulated by countless other groups in the centuries to follow. Their brief but brilliant ascendancy proves that the allure of hidden knowledge and the desire to find a third path between dogmatic religion and purely materialistic science remained a powerful force, even in the so-called Age of Reason, captivating those who believed that true power lay not in public debate, but in secrets whispered in the ears of kings. While the German-based Order of the Gold and Rosy Cross was captivating aristocrats with its structured hierarchy, a far more enigmatic and mystical interpretation of the tradition was taking root in France, one that would prove to be immensely influential. This path was charted by a figure as shadowy as Christian Rosenkreuz himself, the mysterious Martinez de Pasquale, arriving in France around the middle of the 18th century from the Caribbean, possibly from a Portuguese Jewish background. Pasquale presented himself not just as a teacher, but as a divinely appointed possessor of a primal, lost wisdom. He was a man of immense personal magnetism, and he claimed a direct, unbroken lineage back to the true Rosicrucian source, positioning his teachings as the authentic key to the mysteries that others only theorized about. The order he founded, the Knight Masons elect priests of the universe, or Alchemists, represented a radical departure from other esoteric societies of the time. While Freemasonry and the Gold and Rosicrucians used allegory and symbolism, Pasquale's system was explicitly theurgic, meaning it was a form of high magic focused on actual, practical communication with divine realms and beings. For the Alchemists, the lodge was not merely a symbolic classroom. It was a consecrated temple, a supernatural workshop where initiates performed complex rituals to achieve tangible spiritual results. Their ultimate goal was nothing less than the restoration of humanity's pre-fall Adamic state, regaining the divine powers and direct communion with God that were lost through original sin. Central to Pasquale's complex cosmology was the concept of a vast hierarchy of spiritual beings, from angelic choirs down to demonic forces, all of which had emerged from God through a process of divine emanation. Humanity's fall had created a rupture in this cosmic order, and a portion of these beings had become trapped in the material world. The sacred duty of the Alchemical initiate was to actively work towards the reintegration of all creation, to help liberate these captive spirits and restore the universal harmony through a rigorous program of purification, prayer, and ceremonial magic. This was a deeply active and demanding path, requiring a level of personal commitment and spiritual exertion far beyond simply learning passwords or studying philosophical texts. The rituals themselves were extraordinarily elaborate, involving precise divine names, complex seals or sigils drawn to invoke specific angels, and a liturgical use of gestures and words of power. Initiates would spend hours in their oratories, which were set up as sacred spaces with specific altars and symbols, performing these operations to make contact with their personal guardian angel or other high celestial beings. Success in these practices was believed to grant the initiate not just enlightenment, but genuine thaumaturgic powers, the ability to perform miracles, heal the sick, and command spiritual forces. This was Rosicrucian idealism transformed into a potent operational reality, a system where the promise of interacting with the divine was presented as an achievable technical art for the dedicated few. Despite its obscurity and relatively small number of adherents, the influence of Martinez de Pasquale and his Élus coins was profound and far-reaching, primarily through his most famous disciples. Among those drawn into his orbit was Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin, a young cavalry officer who would later become one of the most celebrated mystical philosophers of his era under the name the Unknown Philosopher. Saint-Martin was initially a devoted follower, acting as Pasquale's secretary and deeply immersed in the theurgic practices. Although he eventually moved away from the complex ceremonies towards a more introspective form of mystical prayer, which he called the Way of the Heart, the fundamental framework of Pasquale's thought, the concept of fall and reintegration, remained the bedrock of all his later writings. Another pivotal figure was Jean-Baptiste Willemars, a wealthy silk merchant from Lyon and a prominent Freemason. Willemars became the great organizer and systematizer of Pasquale's often chaotic and orally transmitted teachings. He worked tirelessly to integrate the Élus coin doctrines into the framework of Freemasonry, creating what would become known as the rectified Scottish Rite. This rite, which is still practiced today, carries the unmistakable imprint of Martinism, particularly in its higher degrees, which focus on the themes of reconciliation and the search for the lost word as a symbol of the divine unity shattered by the fall. Through Willemars' efforts, Pasquale's arcane ideas found a durable institutional home, ensuring their survival and dissemination throughout European Masonic circles. The French Rosicrucianism of Martinez de Pasquale thus represents a distinct and powerful current within the broader tradition. It took the German hunger for spiritual gold and alchemical transformation and reinterpreted it not as a laboratory process, but as a direct mystical confrontation with the divine. It was less concerned with the reformation of society or science and more focused on the urgent, personal salvation of the individual soul and its active role in healing a broken cosmos. This theurgic impulse, channeled through his disciples, would go on to fuel the entire 19th century occult revival, providing the foundational ideas for movements like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and shaping the very definition of what Western ceremonial magic would become, proving that the most invisible of Rosicrucian streams could sometimes carve the deepest channels. Yet as the 19th century dawned, a new kind of seeker emerged from the fog of industrial cities and the glare of scientific materialism, one yearning for a personal, experiential spirituality that neither the church nor the laboratory could provide. This Victorian hunger for the mysterious gave birth to the most flamboyant and influential reinterpretation of the Rosicrucian legacy, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Far from the political intrigues of German courts or the theurgic operations of French mystics, the Golden Dawn presented itself as a modern magical university, a systematic curriculum for spiritual development that brilliantly repackaged the entire Western esoteric tradition, with Rosicrucianism as its crowning glory. The founders of the Golden Dawn, figures like William Wynne Westcott and Samuel Liddell MacGregor Mathers, were masters of creative synthesis rather than historical purists. They astutely recognized the power of a prestigious lineage, and they provided one through a foundational document known as the Cipher Manuscripts. These papers, allegedly discovered by Westcott and written in a complex code, purported to outline the rituals of a hitherto unknown German Rosicrucian order. They also contain the address of a certain Fräulein Anna Sprengel, a purported high adept in Germany, from whom Westcott claimed to receive written authority to establish the Golden Dawn as an outer order to this hidden Rosicrucian society. While the historical authenticity of these manuscripts is highly debated, their genius was undeniable. They provided the fledgling order with instant credibility and an unassailable, because utterly unverifiable, link to an authentic tradition. This move represented a seismic shift in the very definition of a lineage. The Golden Dawn did not claim a physical, historical connection to Christian Rosenkreuz's original fraternity through documents or memberships. Instead, they pioneered the concept of spiritual or astral affiliation. They asserted that the true, living Rosicrucian tradition existed on the inner planes of consciousness, accessible to those who had purified their minds and wills through rigorous magical training. An initiate didn't need a historical bloodline. They needed the correct rituals, symbols, and knowledge to attune themselves to this timeless current of wisdom. This clever innovation freed them from the burden of historical proof and opened the path of the Rosy Cross to any dedicated individual, regardless of their background, making the mysteries more democratic than ever before. At the heart of the Golden Dawn system was its intricate grade structure, a ladder of initiation meticulously designed to mirror the Kabbalistic tree of life. The entire journey was a grand Rosicrucian allegory brought to life. The first order, the Golden Dawn itself, consisted of the elemental grades Neophyte, Zelator, Theoricus, Practicus, and Philosophus, which corresponded to the lower Sephiroth and focused on basic magical training, tarot, astrology, and alchemy. Upon completing these, the worthy aspirant would then be initiated into the second order, the Ordo Rossi Rubi et Ori Crucis, the Order of the Red Rose and the Golden Cross, often abbreviated as the R. R et A C. This was the true inner sanctum, the realm of practical magic and Rosicrucian mystery. The initiation ritual into the 5th equals 6th grade, known as the Adeptus Minor, is arguably the Golden Dawn's supreme dramatic achievement and the ultimate expression of its Rosicrucian heart. The candidate undergoes a powerful ceremony that is a direct reenactment of the legend of Christian Rosenkreuz. They symbolically discover the vault, witness the past adepts, and are confronted with the central mystery, the Christos, the divine force of sacrifice and regeneration, revealed not as an external deity but as the highest potential of their own magical will. This ritual was not merely a play. It was a profound psychological and spiritual ordeal designed to catalyze a permanent shift in the initiate's consciousness, alchemically transforming them from a student into an adept, a true bearer of the Rosy Cross. Within this structured framework, the Golden Dawn's approach to magic was intensely practical and syncretic. They absorbed the alchemical symbolism of the Rosicrucians but operationalized it. An adept wouldn't just read about the Philosopher's Stone. They would perform a series of invocations, meditations, and talisman creations designed to manifest those qualities within their own sphere of sensation. They integrated the Rosicrucian love of geometry into the construction of complex magical implements like the Lotus Wand or the Rose Cross Layman, each a masterpiece of symbolic correspondences. The rose and cross became not just an emblem to ponder, but an active tool for ritual, a focal point for directing spiritual energy and balancing the forces of the macrocosm and microcosm. The legacy of the Golden Dawn's reinterpretation is immense, primarily because it attracted some of the most brilliant and troubled minds of the era. Figures like the flamboyant poet and magician Aleister Crowley, the visionary artist Moyna Mathers, and the revolutionary Irish revolutionary Maud Gonne all passed through its temples. Their subsequent work, from Crowley's establishment of the lemma to the continued practice of Golden Dawn, derived magic in groups today, ensured that this particular, highly ritualized Victorian vision of Rosicrucianism became one of the most recognizable forms in the modern world. They successfully translated the elusive promise of the original manifestos into a teachable, repeatable system of spiritual technology, proving that the allure of the Rosy Cross could adapt to thrive even in an age of steam engines and electric light, offering a structured path to the stars for those who felt trapped by the rigid certainties of their time. While the esoteric currents of Europe swirled in secretive lodges and private rituals, the dawn of the 20th century in America presented a new landscape of opportunity, a nation hungry for self-improvement, practical spirituality, and accessible wisdom. It was into this fertile soil that Harvey Spencer Lewis, a charismatic advertising man and avid occultist, planted the seeds of what would become the most publicly visible and widely recognized Rosicrucian organization in the world, the ancient and mystical order Rosicrucians, known universally by its acronym AMOR. Lewis's genius lay not in discovering a hidden vault, but in recognizing the potential of modern marketing and mass communication to democratize mysticism for the modern seeker. Lewis's own origin story, as presented by the order, is a foundational myth worthy of the original manifestos. He claimed that around 1907, while living in New York, he was contacted by European Rosicrucians who recognized his latent aptitudes. They subsequently invited him to France, specifically to the southern city of Toulouse, where he was initiated into their ancient brotherhood. After receiving instruction and being charged with the mission, he returned to America and formally established AMORC in 1915. This narrative of a transatlantic initiation provided the crucial element of legitimacy, directly linking his new American venture to the legendary European tradition, bypassing the complex and often conflicting histories of other groups. To disseminate its teachings, AMORC pioneered a revolutionary method, the mail order lesson. For a modest fee, any interested individual anywhere in the country could receive a regular packet of monographs directly to their home. These lessons were structured as a progressive course of study, covering a vast array of topics from conscious breathing and meditation techniques to the symbolic interpretations of ancient Egyptian lore, basic psychology, and the principles of vibration and energy. This system was brilliantly effective. It removed all barriers of geography, social class, and prior knowledge. One didn't need to find a local lodge or be introduced by a member. The mysteries of the cosmos could arrive in your mailbox to be studied in the privacy of your own home at your own pace. This approach allowed AMORC to grow at an astonishing rate, building a massive global membership that other esoteric orders could only dream of attaining. Central to AMORC appeal was its claim of an uninterrupted lineage stretching back to the schools of ancient Egypt. The order posits that the true Rosicrucians are the latest manifestation of a perennial wisdom tradition, a great white brotherhood of enlightened beings that has guided humanity's spiritual evolution since time immemorial. This lineage is said to include the mystery schools of Egypt, the Neoplatonists of Alexandria, the alchemists of the Arab world, the troubadours of Provence, and the Kabbalists of medieval Europe, culminating in the public declaration of the Rosicrucian manifestos. This grand, sweeping narrative offered members a powerful sense of belonging to something immense and timeless, a comforting antidote to the rapid changes and uncertainties of the modern industrial age. Naturally, these expansive claims have been met with intense skepticism and controversy from historians and members of other esoteric traditions. Critics point to a lack of verifiable evidence for Lewis's initiation in Toulouse, suggesting the entire story was a clever fabrication designed to lend antique credibility to a completely new enterprise. They argue that AMORC teachings are a syncretic blend of then-popular New Thought principles, basic psychology, diluted theosophy, and repackaged elements from earlier Rosicrucian and Masonic sources, all presented in a structured, accessible format. From this perspective, AMORC is not a continuation of an ancient chain but a brilliant modern invention, a product of early 20th century American spiritual entrepreneurship that used the powerful branding of the Rosicrucian name. The debate often centers on the definition of authenticity. For its detractors, authenticity requires a documented historical pedigree, a provable physical connection to the past. By this strict standard, Amorc falls short. For its defenders, however, authenticity resides in the content and efficacy of the teachings themselves. They argue that if the monographs provide a genuine path to personal growth, spiritual insight, and a greater understanding of natural law, then the order is authentically Rosicrucian in spirit and purpose, regardless of its historical origins. The mail order system, far from being a cheap gimmick, is framed as a modern equivalent of the invisible college, adapting the perennial wisdom for a new era and making it available to the many rather than the privileged few. This very public success and the questions it raised inevitably led to friction with other groups. The most notable conflict arose with the Rosicrucian Fellowship of Max Heindel, another American organization founded a few years earlier in Oceanside, California, which was based on theosophical and clairvoyant investigations. For decades, the two orders engaged in a quiet war of words in their publications, each asserting its own legitimacy as the true representative of the Rosicrucian tradition while questioning the claims of the other. This rivalry highlighted the fracturing and commercialization of esotericism in the New World, where ancient symbols became trademarks and mystical truths were offered in competing correspondence courses. Beyond the controversies, Amorc's lasting impact on the Western esoteric landscape is undeniable. It successfully normalized the idea of mystical study outside of any formal religious doctrine, presenting it as a rational, personal, and progressive endeavor. Its headquarters in San Jose, California, with its iconic Egyptian-themed museum, planetarium, and research library, stands as a physical monument to its reach and ambition, a strange and beautiful oasis of ancient mystery in the heart of Silicon Valley. Whether viewed as a legitimate heir to a hidden tradition or as the most successful modern interpretation of it, Amorc fundamentally shaped how hundreds of thousands of people in the 20th century encountered the idea of the Rosicrucian, transforming the secret brotherhood into a global community of home initiates, all connected by the simple, powerful act of opening an envelope filled with timeless ideas. As the 19th century progressed and the Western world grew increasingly fascinated with the distant cultures revealed by global trade and empire, a new spiritual movement arose seeking to unite the wisdom of the East with the esoteric traditions of Europe. This was Theosophy, and its formidable founder, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, would weave the Rosicrucian enigma into the very fabric of her grand synthesis. Blavatsky presented herself as the chosen mouthpiece for a hidden brotherhood of enlightened beings she called the Mahatmas, or ascended masters, spiritually perfected entities who had transcended their physical forms yet continued to guide the evolution of humanity from their remote Himalayan abode. In her monumental work, The Secret Doctrine, she constructed a vast cosmology that drew from Hindu concepts of cycles of time, Buddhist ideas of karma and reincarnation, and Egyptian and Chaldean mythology, all held together by the assertion that these were merely different expressions of one ancient universal truth. It was within this ambitious framework that the Rosicrucians found a new and elevated role. Blavatsky and her closest colleagues, like Henry Steele Olcott, positioned the Brotherhood not as a historical European fraternity, but as a branch of these transcendent Mahatmas. Christian Rosenkreuz and his followers were reinterpreted as highly advanced adepts within a timeless spiritual hierarchy, masters of the Western esoteric currents who worked in concert with Eastern sages to shepherd humanity toward a new stage of consciousness. This was a brilliant doctrinal move that solved several problems at once. It provided a satisfying explanation for the Rosicrucians' famous invisibility. They weren't hiding in German castles but existing on a higher spiritual plane. It also granted Theosophy a ready-made European heritage, allowing it to claim the prestige of Western occultism while simultaneously arguing for the superiority of Eastern wisdom. The Theosophical Society became a powerful engine for disseminating this new vision of the Rosicrucian. Through its prolific publishing arm and widespread lodges, it introduced countless seekers to the idea of a secret government of the world, composed of perfected beings who occasionally intervened in human affairs. The Rosicrucian adept was now portrayed as a master alchemist of the soul, whose true work was the spiritual transformation of the human race rather than the mere transmutation of metals. This resonated deeply with a Victorian audience enthralled by spiritualism and weary of dogmatic religion, offering a sophisticated, intellectualized alternative that framed magic and mystery within an evolutionary narrative of cosmic progress. This theosophical appropriation had a profound and lasting impact on the entire Western esoteric tradition. By placing the Rosicrucians within a global context of ascended masters, Blavatsky effectively universalized them, divorcing them from their specifically Christian and European roots and setting the stage for the more syncretic, New Age interpretations that would follow in the 20th century. Furthermore, her work directly influenced the next generation of occult orders. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, for instance, while critical of some theosophical claims, fully embraced the concept of a secret chief or a hidden adept guiding the order from afar, a clear echo of the theosophical Mahatma. The Rosicrucian myth, having been integrated into this new global spiritual narrative, was forever transformed, its legacy now inextricably linked to the idea of a hidden spiritual hierarchy guiding all of humanity's earthly journey. At the heart of the Rosicrucian enigma lies a philosophical endeavor so ambitious it still captivates us today: the quest to unify the emerging empirical sciences with the timeless yearning for spiritual meaning. In an age where these two realms are often presented as opposing forces, the Rosicrucian vision stands as a powerful testament to a different path, one where the telescope and the prayer, the alembic and the altar, were not rivals but partners in a grand human endeavor. They refused to accept the choice between a cold, mechanistic universe and an unchanging dogmatic faith, proposing instead a third way, a universe alive with divine intelligence, whose laws could be measured by science and whose purpose could be comprehended by the awakened soul. This synthesis was built upon a revolutionary reimagining of the natural world. For the Rosicrucian adept, nature was not a mere collection of objects to be catalogued and exploited, nor was it a deceptive veil hiding a purely spiritual realm. Instead, the cosmos was a vast, open book written in the language of God, a living testament to divine wisdom. Every leaf, stone, and celestial body was a character in this sacred text, and to study physics, botany, or astronomy was to engage in the highest form of devotion. This perspective transformed the scientist into a priest of nature and the laboratory into a sanctified space. The meticulous work of weighing, measuring, and observing became a form of meditation, a way to humbly learn the grammar of creation and participate consciously in the unfolding work of the divine. Their fascination with specific fields like mathematics and optics reveals the depth of this spiritualized science. Geometry was not merely a practical tool for architecture. It was the sacred architecture of God's mind made visible, a reflection of the perfect order underlying all of creation. To study the precise ratios and harmonic proportions found in nature was to glimpse the very blueprint of the universe. Similarly, the study of light optics was of paramount importance. Light was the physical manifestation of divine emanation, the first creation in Genesis, and a symbol of enlightenment itself. Experiments with lenses and prisms were not just physical inquiries but spiritual exercises, attempts to understand how divine illumination refracts through the prism of material reality to create the beautiful spectrum of existence. A microscope didn't just reveal tiny creatures, it revealed the infinite complexity and care with which the Creator had fashioned every level of reality. This holistic approach reached its pinnacle in their view of medicine. The Rosicrucian promise to heal the sick free of charge was a radical social statement in an era where medical knowledge was often a source of profit for physicians and apothecaries. But it was also a profound philosophical stance. Disease was not seen as a random misfortune or a divine punishment, but as a disharmony within the complex system of the human being, a system that integrated physical body, vital energies, and spiritual consciousness. True healing, therefore, required more than just treating symptoms with herbs. It required restoring balance on all levels. This might involve alchemically prepared remedies believed to carry a purified spiritual essence alongside dietary advice, prayer, and spiritual counseling. The physician was a healer of the whole person, an agent of both physical and spiritual reintegration, whose ultimate goal was to help the individual align themselves with the healthy, harmonious flow of the cosmos. In this way, the Rosicrucian project foreshadowed by centuries the deepest yearnings of our own modern scientific age. They anticipated the holism of systems theory, which views the world in terms of interconnected relationships rather than isolated parts. They prefigured the psychological insights of Carl Jung, who saw alchemical symbols as a map of the process of individuation and inner wholeness. Their vision resonates with the questions raised by quantum physics, where the observer is inextricably linked to the observed, blurring the hard line between the subjective and objective worlds. The Rosicrucian manifestos argued that a science that denies consciousness and purpose ultimately creates a disenchanted, meaningless universe, while a spirituality that denies the physical world becomes an irrelevant abstraction. Their enduring legacy is this timeless invitation to seek a wisdom that embraces both, to become pioneers of a new consciousness that can once again see the universe as a sacred, interconnected, and intelligible whole, worthy of both our scientific inquiry and our deepest reverence. While their influence on science and secret societies is profound, the Rosicrucian impact extended vibrantly into the public sphere, leaving an indelible mark on the very aesthetic of the European Baroque. This was not a matter of secret symbols hidden in shadowy corners, but a full-blown transformation of public art and architecture, where the spiritual ideals of the brotherhood were translated into stone, paint, and sound for all to experience. The Baroque era's defining characteristics, dramatic movement, emotional intensity, and a breathtaking fusion of the earthly and the divine provided the perfect visual language for Rosicrucian thought. Artists and architects, often patrons themselves of these esoteric ideas, sought to create works that were not merely beautiful, but were active gateways to higher states of consciousness, designed to overwhelm the senses and elevate the soul. In architecture, this pursuit manifested in structures that were themselves allegories of the alchemical process. One cannot look at the magnificent designs of architects like Johann Bernhard Fischer von Erlach without seeing the Rosicrucian fascination with transformation and divine order. His Karlskirche in Vienna is a masterclass in symbolic synthesis. The church's facade is flanked by two massive columns, which are not merely decorative. They are deliberate evocations of the pillars of Solomon's temple, Jachin and bows, fundamental symbols in Masonic and Rosicrucian lore representing stability and establishment. The entire layout, with its interplay of elliptical and oval spaces, can be interpreted as a representation of the squaring of the circle, a classic alchemical glyph for the reconciliation of spirit and matter. The building doesn't just house the faithful, it invites them on a spatial journey that mirrors the soul's ascent from material heaviness to spiritual illumination. This architectural encoding is even more explicit in the wave of Gothic revival structures that emerged with Rosicrucian patronage. While the full Gothic revival would peak later, its early seeds in the 18th century were often watered by esoteric interests. Certain chapels and estates were designed with precise geometric proportions based on sacred geometry, their floor plans sometimes reflecting the Kabbalistic tree of life or the seven-sided plan of Christian Rosenkreuz's legendary vault. Stained glass windows became more than biblical narratives. Their colors were carefully chosen to correspond with the planetary metals and stages of the alchemical work. The black of Negrido, the white of Albedo, and the triumphant red and gold of the Rubedo, flooding the interior with a literal spectrum of transformative light that changed throughout the day, making the sacred space a living, evolving representation of the great work. The canvas became another powerful medium for this mystical expression. The allegorical paintings associated with the Habsburg Enlightenment and Josephinism are ripe with Rosicrucian themes. Artists like Johann Heinrich Fuseli and later the visionary William Blake, though not Rosicrucians themselves, channeled this current of thought. Their works are populated with archetypal figures representing divine wisdom, Sophia, and the struggle between enlightened reason and base ignorance. A common motif was the perpetual lamp, said to burn in the Rosicrucian vault, often depicted as an inner sun illuminating a group of seekers, symbolizing the eternal light of wisdom that guides the initiated. These paintings were not meant to be simply viewed. They were designed as objects of contemplation, puzzles that would reveal their deeper meanings only to those who understood the symbolic language, turning the act of looking into a form of active meditation and spiritual seeking. Perhaps the most subtle and beautiful encoding of Rosicrucian ideas occurred in the realm of music. Composers of the late Baroque and early classical periods, deeply embedded in Masonic and esoteric circles, began to weave alchemical and mystical concepts directly into their compositions. The structure of a musical piece could mirror the alchemical process. A complex fugue by Johann Sebastian Bach, a composer long speculated to have had esoteric leanings, can be heard as a musical representation of separation and purification, a theme stated simply, then broken down, inverted, and explored from every angle before being reassembled into a triumphant, perfected whole. The very mathematics of harmony were seen as a reflection of the divine order of the cosmos, and by composing within these perfect ratios, musicians were quite literally orchestrating a sonic manifestation of celestial harmony. The most compelling example might be found in the operas of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a devoted Freemason. His masterpiece, The Magic Flute, is a veritable encyclopedia of Masonic and Rosicrucian symbolism set to music. The entire opera is an allegory of initiation. The hero, Tamino, undergoes a series of trials by fire and water, clear parallels to alchemical purification. The characters Sarastro and the Queen of the Night represent the eternal struggle between enlightened wisdom and chaotic ignorance. The music itself encodes these ideas, the key structure, the number of repetitions in a phrase, and the use of certain instruments like the flute and the glockenspiel all carry specific symbolic weight, transforming a popular entertainment into a sophisticated vehicle for transmitting the path from darkness to light, from intellectual confusion to the brilliant harmony of enlightened reason. This artistic legacy demonstrates that the Rosicrucian spirit was never confined to secret manuscripts or closed lodges. It poured out into the world, shaping the cultural landscape in profound and enduring ways, offering a beauty that was both immediate to the senses and infinitely deep for those with the knowledge to listen and see. Of all the captivating details within the Fama Fraternitatis, none has proven more potent or enduring than the discovery of the tomb of Christian Rosenkreuz. This wasn't a simple burial chamber. It was described as a seven-sided vault, an architectural marvel that defied the conventions of its time, each wall representing a different facet of the divine wisdom the Brotherhood claimed to possess. The narrative recounts how, 120 years after the founder's death, the brothers decided to renovate their headquarters, the House of the Holy Spirit. During this work, they came upon a hidden door bearing a powerful inscription that promised great secrets to those worthy of discovering them. Compelled by curiosity and a sense of destiny, they broke through the seal and entered a space that would become the cornerstone of the entire Rosicrucian legend. The scene that greeted them was one of impossible wonder and profound symbolic meaning. The vault was illuminated by an artificial sun set into the ceiling, casting a perpetual ethereal light that banished all shadow and suggested a source of power beyond any known science. At its center rested a circular altar, and upon it lay the perfectly preserved body of Christian Rosenkreuz, clad in ceremonial robes and holding a mysterious book, the famed Book T, which was said to contain the sum of all knowledge he had acquired in his travels. The walls of the chamber were not bare stone. They were covered in mirrors, reflecting the inner light and the image of the founder infinitely, and inscribed with strange, powerful sentences that compressed vast philosophical truths into a few cryptic words. Every element, from the geometric perfection of its design to the artifacts it contained, was a multi-layered puzzle, a physical representation of the Rosicrucian path to enlightenment. This discovery was the ultimate validation for the Brotherhood, the divine signal that the time had come to bring their wisdom into the open world. The perfectly preserved body of their founder served as irrefutable proof, in their eyes, of the efficacy of their alchemical and spiritual practices, a demonstration that they had indeed mastered the secrets of life, death, and immortality. The book in his hands was the ultimate treasure, a compendium of universal knowledge that promised to revolutionize science, medicine, and philosophy. The entire vault was not merely a tomb, it was a time capsule, a seed of future enlightenment carefully planted by a wiser age, now ripened and ready to sprout and transform a world they saw as mired in ignorance and conflict. For centuries, seekers and scholars have debated the nature of this vault. The primary theory views it as pure allegory, a powerful literary device never meant to be taken literally. From this perspective, the 7 sides represent the 7 classical planets and their corresponding metals in alchemy, the 7 days of creation or the 7 liberal arts. The inner sun symbolizes the illuminated consciousness achieved through initiation, and the immortal body of Rosenkreuz represents the timeless, deathless nature of the true spiritual self that awakens within the adept. The book is not a physical object but the unrecorded wisdom within the heart of every sincere seeker. The entire story is a beautiful metaphor for the moment of profound personal awakening, when an individual rediscovers their own divine spark and the ancient, eternal truths that lie dormant within their own soul. Yet, the allure of a physical, discoverable location has never faded. Romantic and determined hunters have scoured Europe for clues, proposing a myriad of possible sites based on tantalizing hints within the text and local folklore. The original Fama mentions the German city of Kassel and the nearby Abbey of Haina, leading many to focus their search on the dense forests and ancient structures of Hesse. Others, interpreting the descriptions of the vault's construction and the founder's travels, have looked toward more exotic locales, suggesting it could be hidden beneath a forgotten Templar commandery within a natural cavern system, or even integrated into the foundations of a well-known Gothic cathedral hidden in plain sight. Each theory is built on a fascinating web of historical coincidence, architectural oddities, and interpretive leaps, a testament to the human desire to turn myth into tangible reality. In our modern era, the quest has taken on new dimensions with the aid of technology. Ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR scans of ancient woodlands, and advanced archaeological techniques have been employed by hopeful groups, searching for anomalies that match the unique 7-sided description. The dream of one day lifting a slab in some forgotten ruin to reveal that glowing chamber, that inner sun still burning after centuries, continues to captivate the imagination. It represents the ultimate historical discovery, a find that would not only rewrite the history of science and spirituality, but would also validate the hopes of countless generations who believed in the promise of a hidden wisdom waiting just beneath the surface of our ordinary world. Ultimately, whether the vault is a physical place, a psychological state, or a masterful allegory, its power lies in what it represents, the belief that a perfect, uncorrupted truth exists. In a world often defined by compromise, half-truths, and fractured knowledge, the image of that pristine chamber offers a compelling vision of wholeness. It suggests that all knowledge is interconnected, that science and spirit are one, and that a state of perfected being is humanity's true inheritance. This is why the mystery endures. It is not a puzzle to be solved so much as an ideal to be aspired to, a reminder that the greatest discoveries often await not in the external world, but within the silent, unexplored vault of our own potential. And so, after this long journey through hidden vaults, coded manifestos, and the lives of those who sought to bridge heaven and earth, we are left with the most compelling question of all: why? Why do these 400-year-old mysteries, born from the quills of anonymous authors in a world lit by candlelight, continue to captivate us in our age of artificial intelligence and instant information? The answer lies not in the historical details, but in the timeless human yearnings they represent. The Rosicrucian enigma is far more than a historical curiosity. It is a powerful mirror reflecting our own perpetual search for meaning, our desire to believe that there is more to this world than what meets the eye, and our innate drive to transform ourselves into something greater. In many ways, our modern world has fulfilled the Rosicrucian dream of a reformation of knowledge. We have unlocked the secrets of the atom, mapped the human genome, and peer back in time to the very edges of the observable universe. Science has given us powers that would seem like pure magic to the authors of the Fama Fraternitatis. Yet, for all our incredible progress, the fundamental questions remain stubbornly unchanged. What is consciousness? Is there purpose behind the cosmos? How do we live a meaningful life? The cold, mechanistic universe described by strict materialism can feel profoundly empty, creating a spiritual vacuum that the Rosicrucian vision rushes to fill. It offers a universe that is not a dead machine, but a living, intelligent, and sacred whole, inviting us not just to understand it, but to commune with it. This is the heart of their enduring allure. The Rosicrucians never presented their path as one of blind faith or dogmatic belief. Instead, they offered a grand experiment, an invitation to personally verify the truths of the spirit through direct experience, much like a scientist tests a hypothesis. They promised that the divine was not a distant overseer, but an immanent force woven into the very fabric of nature, accessible to anyone willing to undertake the disciplined work of inner alchemy. This idea is incredibly potent today. It speaks to those of us who feel disillusioned with traditional religion, but are equally unsatisfied with a purely materialistic worldview. It provides a third way, a path that honors both the rigor of the mind and the longing of the soul, suggesting that the ultimate laboratory for discovery is not out in the stars, but within the depths of our own being. The symbols they left behind, the Rosy Cross, the pelican, the phoenix, continue to resonate because they are archetypal. They speak a universal language that bypasses intellect and touches something primal within us. The image of the rose blooming at the center of the cross is an eternal symbol of beauty and consciousness flourishing amid the challenges and suffering of material existence. The story of the phoenix is our own story of resilience, of the need to let old parts of ourselves die so that new, more enlightened aspects can be born. These are not outdated concepts, they are the very milestones of the human journey, as relevant to someone navigating a modern life crisis as they were to a 17th century alchemist tending his furnace. Finally, the Rosicrucian mystery endures because it is, at its core, a story of immense hope. It is a promise that hidden within the confusion and chaos of the world, and within the turmoil of our own minds, there is a pattern, a harmony, and a gleaming thread of purpose waiting to be discovered. It suggests that each of us carries a spark of that original, divine light, and that through our own efforts, we can fan that spark into a flame that illuminates not only our own path, but also helps to light the way for others. Theirs is a vision of a future not dominated by technology alone, but graced by wisdom, a world where humanity finally achieves its potential as both the student of nature and the steward of its deepest secrets. Now we turn this question over to you. After exploring the shadows and the light of this incredible story, which aspect captures your imagination the most? Is it the tantalizing possibility that Christian Rosenkreuz's vault still lies hidden somewhere, waiting to be found? Is it the revolutionary idea that science and mysticism can be reunited into a single, glorious pursuit of truth? Or is it the personal, spiritual challenge of the inner alchemical journey, the call to conduct your own great work of self-transformation? Share your thoughts and your own mysteries in the comments below. The conversation, just like the search for hidden knowledge, is never